February 17, 1944. Dawn breaks over the coral sands of Eniwetok Atoll, where 24 hours earlier there had been nothing but palm trees and pristine beach. Now, the tropical morning air vibrates with the growl of diesel engines and the clank of steel on coral. A Caterpillar D8 bulldozer, painted navy gray and bearing the insignia of Naval Construction Battalion 110, pushes another load of crushed coral toward what will become by sunset. A 6,000-foot runway capable of handling B-24 Liberators. Chief Petty Officer Frank Iafrate wipes the Pacific salt from his goggles and checks his watch. 14 hours since the first Seabee boot touched this atoll, and already the skeleton of an airfield stretches across land that Japanese strategists had assumed would require months to develop. The smell of diesel fuel mingles with coral dust and the distant scent of cordite, while beneath the rumble of construction machinery lies a sound that would haunt Japanese military planners for the remainder of the war, the unstoppable rhythm of American industrial democracy reshaping the Pacific. Battlefield. The concept of rapid airfield construction had emerged from a fundamental American approach to warfare that Japanese strategists had never encountered. The systematic application of civilian construction expertise to military objectives. Traditional military engineering, as practiced by all combatant nations, relied on soldier engineers working with hand tools and limited machinery to slowly develop captured territory. Airfield construction, under conventional military doctrine, was measured in months and required extensive logistical preparation and specialized engineering surveys. But the United States Navy Construction Battalions, the Seabees, operated according to principles borrowed directly from American commercial construction. These were not soldier engineers learning construction trades in military schools, but experienced civilian contractors, heavy equipment operators, and construction foremen who had been given naval uniforms and sent to apply industrial construction techniques to Pacific Atolls. They brought with them not only technical expertise, but an entirely different philosophy of what was possible when abundant resources met systematic efficiency. The Japanese had prepared for a different kind of war. Their defensive strategy in the Central Pacific assumed that captured atolls would require extensive development before becoming operationally significant. Japanese war plans allocated months for airfield construction, assuming that American forces would follow the traditional pattern of methodical development that characterized military engineering. This assumption provided the foundation for Japanese defensive strategy. Allow the Americans to capture isolated atolls, then use the extended construction period to organize counterattacks against vulnerable and underdeveloped positions. The first shock came not as battle, but as impossibility made manifest. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft flying over Majuro Atoll on February 2, 1944, reported standard invasion preparations, ships unloading supplies, troops establishing perimeters, the familiar rhythm of amphibious operations. 48 hours later, the same reconnaissance flight reported a fully operational airfield with fighters and bombers already conducting combat missions. The Japanese pilots, trained to expect construction timelines measured in months, filed reports that their own intelligence officers initially dismissed as observational errors. The mathematics of Seabee construction defied every principle of military engineering that Japanese doctrine understood. At Majuro, Naval Construction Battalion 71 had unloaded 14,000 tons of construction equipment and supplies in the first 24 hours after the initial assault. By hour 36, 8 bulldozers were operating simultaneously, stripping vegetation and leveling coral. By hour 60, the first layer of pierced steel planking was being laid over compacted coral base. By hour 84, the first American aircraft had landed on a runway that Japanese military doctrine insisted should not exist for at least 4 months. This was construction as American industrial warfare. Problems solved through abundance of equipment rather than efficiency of technique. challenges overcome through systematic application of overwhelming resources rather than careful conservation of limited assets. The Seabees had brought to Pacific Atolls the same philosophy that built American highways, dams, and skyscrapers, the assumption that any engineering challenge could be solved by applying sufficient machinery, materials, and manpower in systematic coordination. Lieutenant Colonel Takeshi Moriyama, commanding Japanese air reconnaissance in the Marshall Islands, reported to his superiors with the confusion of a professional soldier confronting phenomena outside his experience. American construction proceeds according to principles we do not understand. They appear to possess unlimited quantities of heavy machinery and show no concern for equipment preservation or fuel conservation. Their construction rate suggests either false intelligence reporting or engineering capabilities beyond our current assessment. The bulldozer became the symbol that crystallized Japanese understanding of their impossible situation. Japanese construction projects relied on human labor supplemented by limited mechanical equipment carefully maintained and conserved for essential tasks. American Seabee battalions operated fleets of bulldozers, graders, and excavators, as if machinery were as expendable as ammunition. When a bulldozer broke down, rather than conducting careful repairs, the Seabees would often abandon it and unload a replacement from their seemingly inexhaustible supply ships. The contrast was not merely about equipment, availability. It represented a fundamental difference in industrial philosophy. Japanese military doctrine emphasized careful maintenance and conservation of mechanical assets, recognizing that replacement equipment was difficult to obtain and transport. American Seabee operations treated heavy machinery as consumable resources, to be used intensively and replaced when necessary without concern for conservation. Chief Warrant Officer James Thompson, commanding the equipment section of NCB 133, exemplified this philosophy in his operational reports. Bulldozers are tools, not treasures. We run them 24 hours per day in 3-shift operations. When they break, we fix them. When they break beyond field repair, we push them aside and bring up fresh equipment. The mission is airfield completion, not equipment preservation. This approach shocked Japanese observers who monitored American construction operations through intelligence networks and aerial reconnaissance. Japanese construction doctrine allocated specific machinery to particular projects and planned extensive maintenance schedules to preserve equipment for future operations. The sight of Americans operating bulldozers around the clock, abandoning damaged equipment rather than conducting time-consuming repairs, and unloading fresh machinery as if it were ordinary supplies, revealed an industrial capacity beyond Japanese comprehension. The transformation of Kwajalein Atoll demonstrated the strategic implications of rapid airfield construction with devastating clarity. Japanese defenders had fortified the atoll expecting months of warning before American air operations could begin from captured positions. Their defensive plans allocated extensive time for reinforcement, resupply, and preparation of counterattack forces. But Seabee construction compressed this timeline from months to days, fundamentally altering the strategic balance in the Central Pacific. On February 1, 1944, Kwajalein was a Japanese stronghold defended by 8,700 troops and considered impregnable to immediate air attack from captured American positions. By February 7th, American B-24 bombers were conducting daily raids against Japanese positions throughout the Marshall Islands from newly constructed runways on previously uninhabitable coral atolls. The psychological impact on Japanese defenders was devastating. They found themselves under sustained air attack from airfields that had not existed a week earlier. Naval Construction Battalion 145, working in coordination with Marine Corps engineers, had constructed a 7,200-foot bomber runway on Kwajalein in 132 hours of continuous operations. The construction process consumed 47,000 tons of coral aggregate, 12,000 sections of pierced steel planking, and 850,000 gallons of diesel fuel. But the strategic impact transcended material statistics. Japanese defensive strategy throughout the Central Pacific was suddenly obsolete. The Japanese response revealed the depth of their strategic confusion. Military planners in Tokyo, receiving reports of American airfield construction rates, initially assumed the reports were exaggerated or misunderstood. When multiple sources confirmed construction timelines measured in days rather than months, Japanese strategy shifted from defensive preparation to desperate improvisation. Airfields that could appear overnight could not be defended by conventional methods. Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, formerly commander of the Pearl Harbor Strike Force and now responsible for Central Pacific defense, summarized the strategic implications in a classified assessment dated March 15, 1944. American construction capabilities rendered traditional defensive strategy impossible. We cannot prepare counterattacks against positions that become operationally significant before our intelligence networks can report their existence. The Americans have achieved tactical surprise through engineering speed rather than operational secrecy. This recognition marked a fundamental shift in Japanese military thinking, from confidence in defensive preparation to desperation in the face of American industrial capacity. The Seabees had achieved what no tactical innovation could accomplish. They had compressed the timeline of Pacific warfare from the measured pace of traditional military operations to the accelerated rhythm of American industrial production. The bulldozer had become more than construction equipment. It had become the instrument of strategic transformation. Each machine represented not merely mechanical capability, but industrial philosophy applied to warfare. American construction battalions operated as if resources were infinite, equipment was expendable, and engineering challenges existed only to be overwhelmed by systematic application of superior force. The daily routine of Seabee operations revealed this industrial approach to military construction. Work proceeded in continuous shifts around the clock, with floodlights illuminating construction sites that never stopped operating. Equipment maintenance was conducted by specialized units while construction continued, ensuring that mechanical breakdowns never halted progress. Supply ships arrived on precise schedules, unloading fresh equipment and materials as if the Pacific Atolls were factory sites rather than military objectives. The construction of Henderson Field on Guadalcanal had provided the prototype, but the 1944 Central Pacific operations perfected the technique. At Saipan, 3 separate Seabee battalions constructed parallel runways simultaneously, completing in 5 days what Japanese military engineering would have required 5 months to accomplish. The operation consumed 89,000 tons of construction. Materials delivered by specialized transport ships designed specifically for rapid unloading of heavy equipment. This was warfare as American industrial democracy. Problems solved through abundance rather than ingenuity. Challenges overcome through systematic resource application rather than tactical brilliance. The Seabees had demonstrated that given sufficient materials, equipment, and organizational efficiency, any engineering objective could be achieved on schedules that rendered enemy defensive planning obsolete. Japanese defenders on Saipan reported the psychological impact of facing airfield construction that proceeded faster than their ability to organize effective resistance. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding Japanese forces on the island, observed in his final radio transmission, "Enemy construction proceeds without regard for our defensive fire. They lose equipment to our artillery, then immediately replace it with fresh machinery. They operate as if our resistance is merely a minor inconvenience to be overcome through additional resources rather than tactical response." The secret lay not in individual construction techniques, but in the systematic integration of civilian industrial capacity with military objectives. Seabee battalions were recruited from American construction companies that had built highways, airports, and urban infrastructure across the continental United States. They brought to Pacific warfare not merely technical skills but organizational systems developed through decades of commercial construction experience. 3. Logistics networks supporting Seabee operations represented American industrial democracy in its most overwhelming form. Specialized transport ships, designed and built specifically for construction battalion operations, could unload complete airfield construction packages, including bulldozers, graders, concrete mixers, steel planking, fuel supplies, and maintenance equipment. These ships operated on precise schedules coordinated with military operations, ensuring that construction materials arrived simultaneously with assault forces. The contrast with Japanese construction methods was absolute. Japanese military engineering relied on soldier engineers working with hand tools and limited mechanical support. Construction materials were scarce, carefully rationed, and transported through supply networks already strained by combat operations. The idea of disposable bulldozers, expendable equipment, and around-the-clock construction schedules was incomprehensible to military organizations operating under resource constraints. The bulldozer had proven prophetic in ways that transcended mechanical symbolism. At Tinian, Seabee operations achieved the impossible by constructing the longest bomber runways in the Pacific Theater, on an island that Japanese intelligence had dismissed as unsuitable for major air operations. The construction consumed 180,000 tons of materials and required the movement of 4.2 million cubic yards of earth and coral, but was completed in 6 weeks rather than the 6 months that conventional military engineering would have required. These runways would later support the B-29 superfortresses that conducted the strategic bombing campaign against Japan itself, including the missions that dropped atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The bulldozers that had seemed like simple construction equipment had become instruments of strategic victory, reshaping not merely Pacific Atolls, but the entire trajectory of the war. The psychological transformation was complete. Japanese military leaders who had begun the war, confident in their ability to conduct defensive operations on extended timelines, found themselves confronting an enemy whose construction capabilities compressed strategic planning from months to days. The careful defensive preparations that had characterized Japanese strategy became irrelevant when airfields could appear faster than intelligence networks could report their construction. By September 1944, the bulldozer had become the symbol of American victory in the Central Pacific, representing not merely construction capability, but the fundamental difference between industrial democracy and military authoritarianism. The Seabees had demonstrated that free societies, given sufficient resources and organizational freedom, could achieve engineering objectives on timelines that authoritarian militaries considered impossible. Each airfield represented more than strategic positioning. It embodied American industrial philosophy applied to warfare. Built by civilian contractors in naval uniforms, equipped with machinery mass-produced in factories across the continental United States, supplied by logistics networks that treated heavy equipment like ordinary cargo, the Pacific airfields were democracy mobilized for total war. The transformation was complete. Japanese strategic thinking, which had assumed that captured territory would require months of development before becoming operationally significant, was rendered obsolete by construction techniques that compressed development timelines to days. The samurai tradition of careful preparation and methodical execution had met systematic abundance and accelerated industrial processes. The outcome had been predetermined not by military skill, but by industrial capacity, the capacity of free peoples to organize, produce, and deploy resources on scales that traditional military organizations could not comprehend. The final demonstration came with the construction of Northwest Field on Guam, where Seabee battalions working in coordination built a complete heavy bomber base in 4 weeks, including runways, taxiways, maintenance facilities, fuel storage, and support infrastructure sufficient to handle an entire wing of B-29 superfortresses. The operation required 220,000 tons of construction materials and 150 pieces of heavy construction equipment, but achieved in 1 month what Japanese military engineering would have required 1 year to accomplish. This was the triumph of the bulldozer philosophy. Any challenge could be overcome through sufficient application of mechanical resources. Any timeline could be compressed through systematic efficiency. Any engineering objective could be achieved through abundance properly organized and systematically deployed. The Seabees had proven that industrial democracy, when mobilized for war, possessed advantages that no amount of traditional military preparation could overcome. In the end, the bulldozers wrote their own epilogue across the coral atolls of the Central Pacific, where runways built in days supported air operations that compressed Japanese defensive strategy from years to months, from months to weeks, from weeks to the inevitable recognition that industrial abundance, properly applied, renders traditional military resistance futile. The bulldozer and the airfield had become symbols of democracy's triumph over authoritarianism, of abundance over scarcity, of systematic efficiency over traditional craftsmanship. The Seabees had demonstrated that free peoples, given the resources and organizational freedom that democracy provides, can reshape not merely landscapes, but the entire trajectory of human conflict. The bulldozers still rumble in memory across Pacific coral, their engines thundering with the sound of liberty's inexhaustible capacity to build, to create, and to achieve any objective that democratic determination chooses to pursue.